The first reading is from the book of Isaiah. It is chapter 35, verses 1 through 10. The wilderness and the dry land shall be glad. The desert shall rejoice and blossom. Like the crocus, it shall blossom abundantly and rejoice with joy and singing. The glory of Lebanon shall be given to it, the majesty of Carmel and Sharon. They shall see the glory of the Lord, the majesty of our God. Strengthen the weak hands and make firm the feeble knees. Say to those who are of a fearful heart, be strong, do not fear. Here is your God. He will come with vengeance, with terrible recompense. He will come and save you. Then the eyes of the blind shall be opened, and the ears of the deaf unstopped. Then the lame shall leap like a deer, and the tongue of the speechless sing for joy. For waters shall break forth in the wilderness, and streams in the desert. The burning sand shall become a pool, and the thirsty ground springs of water. The haunt of jackals shall become a swamp. The grass shall become reeds and rushes. A highway shall there be, and it shall be called the Holy Way. The unclean shall not travel on it, but it shall be for God's people. No traveler, not even fools, shall go astray. No lion shall be there, nor shall any ravenous beast come up on it. They shall not be found there, but the redeemed shall walk there. And the ransomed of the Lord shall return and come to Zion with singing. Everlasting joy be upon their heads. They shall obtain joy and gladness, and sorrow and sighing shall flee away. The word of the Lord.
So today's first reading from Isaiah is a beautiful message of God's restoration of a broken and hurting people. Be strong. Do not fear. God is coming to help you. You will be personally restored. The eyes of the blind will be opened, and the ears of the deaf unstopped. And you will be restored collectively. There's even going to be a highway in the midst of the desert for you to return home to Zion. It is so beautiful and poetic that even people who have never read any of Isaiah may be familiar with this chapter because Handel based part of his Messiah on verses 5 to 6. The only problem, if you read it within the context of the whole book of Isaiah, is that it seems out of place. And that's because at this point in the book of Isaiah, it doesn't seem like anybody needs restoration yet. So to really understand this, you need to know that Isaiah is a prophet in Jerusalem who lives about 200 years before Jerusalem is conquered by the Babylonians and the people are sent into exile in Babylon. And the Babylonian exile and deportation is the most cataclysmic event for the people of Israel in the Old Testament after the bondage of slavery in Egypt. Almost all of the prophetic literature centers around before, during, and after this event. This is a huge thing. But during the first 39 chapters of Isaiah, that event is still 200 years off. Isaiah counsels the kings of Judah to remain faithful to God and to trust that God will not abandon them no matter what. During these years, other people are trying to conquer Jerusalem, most notably the Assyrians, but they never succeed in destroying it. And although Isaiah does prophesy that worse days are coming, they don't show up by chapter 35. It's not until chapter 40 that the context changes. At this point, the people of Judah have already been conquered, and they've been living in exile in Babylon for a very long time. So at the beginning of chapter 40, the prophet, sometimes it's 200 years later he is referred to as second Isaiah, announces that God is about to bring them home. And chapter 40 begins with the voice crying in the wilderness, "Prepare the way of the Lord," which is quoted in the Gospels in relation to John the Baptist, and it's where Handel really gets good material for the Messiah. And this is why most biblical scholars think that Isaiah chapter 35 is out of place. And they figured that whoever was assembling the book of Isaiah as we now have it put this chapter where it is to remind readers of the coming promise of restoration just as things are beginning to get ominous. But still, it seems out of place. But actually, so does the vision of the highway. Isaiah describes a highway in a place where it doesn't belong, in the wilderness, in the desert. You don't build a highway in the desert. You build it along rivers and near coastlines where there is water and where you won't get lost without points of reference. You build it where there are going to be some settlements of people from whom you could obtain help. And you build it where the lions and other hungry creatures aren't going to eat you. And yet, the vision of Isaiah posits God's way forward in a place it's not supposed to be. The way forward is not the long circuitous route that people might take to get home from Babylon, but rather a direct route through the desert, through the wilderness. And on this highway, nobody gets lost. There is abundant water. There are springs and pools of water. The wild animals are kept at bay, and even the people who are too weak or ill to make the journey still get there. We don't know exactly by what route the people of Judah eventually were able to return to Jerusalem after 70 years of exile. They probably traveled by a number of different routes, but this vision was remembered because the key thing that God did was to prepare a way forward, a way for them to go home, a way that wasn't supposed to be there and that seemed out of place. And this is a key theme both in the prophetic literature as well as in the Gospels. God provides a way for people to move forward. But sometimes people don't recognize the way, or they don't even look for the way because it isn't in the place they expected, or it doesn't look like what they expected. This is essentially what's happening in today's gospel reading. In last Sunday's reading, John the Baptist appears in the wilderness and he describes what he thought the road through the wilderness would look like. It involved the axe lying at the root of the trees, a winnowing fork separating the wheat from the chaff, and a burning with unquenchable fire. All kinds of good dramatic stuff. But when Jesus doesn't do that stuff, John sends messengers from prison, and he asks essentially, are you the highway we're supposed to be on, or should we look for another? And Jesus replies with essentially a roadmap that looks like Isaiah's vision. Go and tell John, the blind receive their sight, the lame walk, the lepers are cleansed, the deaf hear, the dead are raised, the poor have good news brought to them. This is the highway that Jesus brings, but it clearly seemed out of place to John at that moment. And so an important thing for us to remember as we read these texts is that sometimes God places a way forward for us that may initially seem out of place. It's not what we were looking for. It's not where we were looking for it, and it may not even seem to be the right time to be looking for it. So often, being open to God's new way forward in our lives means looking for God's way forward right now. You know, during Advent, it's real easy to get caught up in remembering how God made a way forward for ancient peoples in the Bible, perhaps the ancient Israelites or even the early Christians. Or we sometimes read all these stories about the end times, and that makes us think about someday in the future where Jesus comes again, and that's going to be the way forward there. But the point of these readings is to call us to look for how Jesus is coming into our lives right now and calling us to move forward right now. I may not think I need a new highway or a different highway or one going through the wilderness because I am a Lutheran and want to keep going down the same road I have always gone down. I like the old road. But the vision of Isaiah reminds me to be open right now to to the new and different paths that God is putting before me, even and especially when I have become really comfortable in the ruts of the old road. Sometimes being open to God's new way forward means looking for that way in places where we haven't looked before or even dismissed as impractical. And the wilderness is not a place anybody in the ancient world would look for a highway, certainly not one that you would want to be on. But this highway Isaiah envisions has blessings and possibilities, even though it runs through the wilderness. And part of our call as people of God is to look for the blessings and the possibilities God is putting in front of us, even in places that seem out of place. I can remember any number of times in my life, and you probably can too in yours, when I really did not want to live in a new way or go down a different road, especially when it felt like it was running through the wilderness. And I didn't want to do that for very many good and practical reasons. But then I found that at least some of those ways were actually good and helpful. And I found blessings even in the midst of wildernesses, and I learned things that helped me on my journey because I found those new possibilities that God put before me in places that I also thought were out of place, not unlike springs of water popping up in the desert. And sometimes for us too, learning God's new way forward in our lives means looking for God's way forward when we are not feeling like we're in the wilderness. You know, when I was in Boy Scouts, which is a long time ago, they taught us all kinds of things to do if we found ourselves stuck in the wilderness and lost in the wilderness. Notably, this was before cell phones and GPS. But in fact, the time to prepare for a way through the wilderness is before you get stuck in it. And maybe this is why Isaiah 35 is out of place. It reminds readers that before you're stuck in whatever exile you may find yourself in or feel that you're in, prepare yourself with hope in God's promises. And one of the themes of Advent is to be involved in the kind of preparation that teaches us to live forward with hope and expectation, so that in the coming year, if we find ourselves struggling in a wilderness, we know how to look for God's way forward and for God's blessings and possibilities and promises, even in the midst of that wilderness. So Isaiah 35, it is out of place, but I think that's part of the point. God's new way forward in our lives often seem out of place as well. And so as we journey through Advent and beyond, watch for God's new ways in places you may not have expected them to be. As we journey through Advent and beyond, look for signs of God's blessing and promise, even and especially if you feel like you're living through a wilderness moment. And as we journey through Advent and beyond, remember that God is always doing new things in your life and calling you forward to new life, even if some of those things and places seem out of place.